Hello everyone, and welcome to WAIFU, where we analyze interesting Fire Emblem units. In these videos, I analyze units that I think are underrated or overrated by the community. Here we correct ages of misinformation. We straighten out incorrect narratives that have gone unchallenged for too long because people just keep repeating what others say without checking the facts. Case in point, listen to this self-proclaimed Fire Emblem expert talk about Hayato from Fire Emblem Birthright. I feel like I have to put Hayato pretty low right now and maybe adjust it a little bit. I don't know if I should leave room for units that are worse than him. I don't see any off the top of my head that look worse than him. Maybe he's an actual F tier, but right now there's no one else in these tiers anyway, so I can't really compare him. So I'll play it safe and put him in E. But he does not seem very good. But let me know if you used him and actually made him good. It's probably possible. But stat-wise, unless I'm missing something, he seems really bad. Oh my god, Hayato, I am so sorry. The real OGs of my channel will remember my rather uninformed attempts at tiering Birthright. I put this man in E tier because of how bad he seemed in his base class. But, quote unquote, recently, I finished another draft playthrough of Fates, and this time on Birthright. It was a Soyo draft, meaning I had no control over which unit I would have on my team, and instead they were picked for me. I was given Hayato, and coming off that playthrough, I thought, I should delete this video, and maybe my entire channel. With that performance, Hayato has to be one of the best units in Birthright, and I put him in E tier. What was I thinking? In my defense, Hayato is pretty garbage when he first joins. Anyone who wants to give this guy a go is immediately met with some of the most cringe-looking battle forecasts in Fire Emblem history. As far as mage performances go, this is on par with FE6 Lina or FE7 Nino. He can't fight anything by himself, he's in danger of getting killed in one round, his accuracy is questionable, and the only thing he has in spades is Pride. Pride, of course, being his personal skill, and at least that one is pretty good. As long as Hayato is underleveled, it's a free +4 damage for him. But when Pride alone is doing most of the work when dealing damage, then we've got a problem. It's not one that's impossible to overcome. You can make any unit work in Fire Emblem given enough favoritism and patience. You can't spell favoritism somewhat incorrectly without Fates. You could do the thing that we usually do with underpowered units in Fates and feed them kills with the help of your other units, either through pair up or through dual strike, but there is a more straightforward method, and that is by using a Heart Seal. Hayato's Heart Seal class is Oni Savage. I have never seen a unit change so drastically through one reclass. Hayato goes from a weak, fragile mage to a muscled axe user, gaining 6 strength and 6 defense in the process. However, do not expect this to be Lou turning into Gonzalez. That strength stat still has a long way to go. If anything, Hayato turns into a worse version of Rinkah. Look at his stats right now. They're all around worse than Rinkah was several chapters ago. And at least Rinkah has had some time to grow more stats, weapon ranks, and support since then. And if you're like me, or the community at large maybe a couple years ago, you might not even think of Rinkah as particularly good. Well, if that's what we thought, we would be wrong, and that's why you're now watching WAIFU Rinkah. WAIFU is a series where, whoa, abs in those Fire Tribe units. At first glance, Rinkah doesn't really do much to stand out in early Birthright. She's very mid both in the Branch of Fate chapters as well as when Birthright properly begins. She will usually not double, her base strength is only 8, and she has an E rank in clubs, so you can't boost her damage output with a stronger weapon like an Iron Club. However, just like Hayato, she also has a personal skill that gives +4 damage. Fiery Blood is easy to activate either by having her take damage or, my favorite, using an HP tonic after the map starts. Almost right off the bat, Rinkah can be made to one round with enough resources, but you have to work for it. She needs strength and speed tonics and a speed pair up, and you have to activate her personal, and even then she will not one round every enemy type, just some of them. For most people, especially those playing blindly, the more intuitive way to use her is to pair her into someone else for her excellent pair up bonuses. The Oni Savage class gives +4 strength and +2 defense, and Rinkah's personal bonuses add even more strength, speed and defense as you get more support levels with her. The most natural support partner for her is Kaze, since he desperately needs both power and bulk, and Rinkah can easily get the C support with him in their joint chapters before the route split. However, almost any unit makes great use of these bonuses, particularly if they don't need help doubling, so I don't think it's strange that people fall for the trap of using Rinkah as a backpack as opposed to doing everything in their power to make her kill enemies. That's how I felt about Rinkah at first anyway, maybe you felt differently, but this very limited experience with her didn't exactly warm me up to the idea of using a precious heart seal just to turn another unit into a worse version of her. Sure, there's the novelty of seeing Hayato's little head on a big muscly body, that's a good enough reason to do it for fun, but there are actually gameplay related reasons to put up with Hayato that we'll get into later. For now, let us look at how the two of them performed during the first portion of Birthright. Hayato's troubles are not over with just a reclass to Oni. He is bulkier now, but his damage output is still suspect. The best way to solve that is to have him go to town in the Mozu paralogue. It gives Hayato good experience while he's at level 1, but it doesn't have the enemy density and time pressure that the next map does. The faceless are all one range, and much easier to kill at your own pace than the enemies in Chapter 9. This does add to Hayato's favoritism tab though. He's already consumed the only heart seal we get until Chapter 13, and we're also giving him an easy map to farm experience and weapon rank on. These are significant drawbacks to using Hayato that Rinkah, and indeed most other units in Birthright, do not have. That heart seal could have been used to reclass Corrin to their talent class and start training there, or to bring Sakura into Pegasus Knight so she can level up faster and build lance rank, or get Azama into Apothecary to take advantage of his massive strength. When analyzing and evaluating Fire Emblem units, I find it really difficult to assign an arbitrary value to resource consumption. It's a really important piece of the puzzle, but it is difficult to say just how much worse a unit is if they rely on a resource, especially one as scarce as a heart seal. The old way of analyzing it was like, okay, if Hayato takes the heart seal, that means all these other units that want the heart seal are now worse, so the benefit Hayato gets from using the heart seal is cancelled out by how much worse these other units become by not using it. This approach is justifiable, but it's very theoretical and it's also useless in practice. I think the more useful metric is to look at it from a team composition perspective. Hayato needs the heart seal and Rinkah does not. That means Rinkah is more compatible with teams that want to use the early heart seal on one of their other units, like Sakura or Azama or certain Corrin talents. This is a much more practical way to look at the problem because, honestly, you'd be pretty silly to plan a Birthright team where multiple people really want the same item. We can approach Mozu's paralogue from the same angle. If you're using, well, Mozu, one of the best ways to get her going is to feed her as many faces as you can in her joining chapter, so you probably will not want to use Hayato and Mozu during the same playthrough, while Rinkah has no such limitation. I also feel obligated to mention that feeding Faceless to Hayato, or Mozu for that matter, is probably going to cost you a bit of time, as he performs worse than your other units. You'll probably have to hold back your main team a fair bit to make sure they don't kill Hayato before he has a chance to finish them off, and especially Mozu needs a large degree of protection to make sure she doesn't get finished off. The usual way to penalize units for this is to say that it costs turns to do so. Most people, including me, don't really care about turn count when they're playing, and are happy to turtle through the chapter to feed their training project all their kills. Or they're smart enough to plan the chapter in a way that both finishes faster than my playthroughs, and they still train their favorite XP target. But in some shape or form it costs us time. Either it's spent playing or it's time spent planning, and that is time we could have spent touching grass, or working out, or watching an enemy phase in Path of Radiance. Basically, what I'm saying is, if you value turns or real time, that can be an advantage to using Rinkah over Hayato. But I know that for a lot of people, the journey of training a unit like Hayato in this map is part of what they enjoy about these games, and so rather than a deterrent or a disadvantage, they might view it as a positive thing about him. And there's nothing wrong with that. Even with that little training arc, Hayato should still be behind in level compared to most other units including Rinkah. Fortunately for him, Fates rubber bands your unit's growth, which means that he can catch up fast despite Rinkah's stat leads. You get roughly 30 experience for killing an enemy at equal level, and then it drops off fast, about 5 to 6 points per level that you have over the enemy. On the other hand, Hayato will be below the enemy level, so he will gain a lot more. For example, in this clip, I'm having him both kill a level 10 enemy. Hayato is also level 10, so he gains 30 experience, while Rinkah is 3 levels higher, so she only gains about 10 points. In most Fire Emblem games, a stronger unit at a higher level can maintain or even extend their level lead thanks to their ability to fight more enemies and kill them more often, but in Fates you get punished so harshly for being overleveled that it is inevitable that Hayato will close the level gap. However, catching up in levels comes at a cost. Hayato will, at some point, no longer benefit from Pride. Once he reaches the enemy's level, they will never surpass him again unless you intentionally hold him back, meaning he will lose his +4 damage skill, while Rinkah retains access to hers. Keeping that in mind, the two look very similar when leveled up. They have practically the same strength, defense and resistance. The biggest difference right now, aside from the personal skill issue, is the skill issue. Hayato is down 5 points of skill compared to Rinkah. The differences between Rinkah and Hayato are not massive, but they exist, and as the game goes on and Hayato catches up in levels, he gains a significant stat lead. Assuming you level both to 15 before promoting them, and then leveling further to 10, Hayato will have leads of various sizes in HP, strength, magic, luck, defense, and resistance. However, skills change the equation a bit. Once Hayato surpasses the enemy level, he effectively loses his Pride skill, losing 4 damage. He does, however, still keep magic +2 from his base class for an extra 2 magic. But Rinkah retains the option to take advantage of Fiery Blood for +4 damage, both on physical and magical attacks. Of course, these are just their average stats, and depending on what enemy you're making them fight, how RNG screwed they were, and what resources you have available, they're not guaranteed to be a difference maker. So for a moment, let's park the comparisons between the two and talk about their collective advantages over other units. The biggest advantage that the Oni Savages have is their sheer physical bulk. A lot of enemies can barely scratch them, and some even deal 0 damage. In Conquest, that would slow you down, as enemies refuse to attack if they see 0 damage. But in Birthright and Revelation, enemies do not have that AI quirk. This allows them to take on big groups of enemies with little fear of death. They're not quite invincible. Bosses and magical enemies, especially sorcerers, can certainly get them killed if you're careless. But besides that, they don't really have any major flaws holding them back. Their offense is usually enough to one-round weaker enemies. Even if they lack the power to KO, or they suffer from a skill issue, they have the durability to survive and not get punished. Now, at this point you might say, so you found 2 units that can survive and one-round enemies in Birthright, one of the easiest Fire Emblem games. Big deal. Neither of those are very difficult. I'm sure there are tons of units and builds that can accomplish that. And you'd be right, at this point of the game it is not hard to do either or even both of those things. You have the Guard Naginata to give one unit outstanding bulk, Corrin is there with the Dragonstone if you just need a tank, Silas is very durable thanks to his excellent stats and personal skill, not to mention he's more mobile. However, what Onis have that a lot of tanks don't is viable 1-2 range. Once Rinkah and Hayato promote to Oni Chieftain, they gain access to scrolls. You lose a lot of offensive and defensive power switching the aforementioned units to something like a Javelin or a Kodachi, but for Oni Chieftain, this unlocks a whole new spectrum of options. First of all, Birthright gives us 3 copies of the Horse Spirit. This scroll gives the wielder +3 skill, speed, defense, and resistance, greatly enhancing their tanking abilities. It does have a rather low 4 might, but Hayato and Rinkah have the damage output to make it work. If you need a little more punch, there's always the Bolt Axe. That thing has 14 might, and also gives you weapon triangle advantage over the lance and dagger enemies that Horse Spirit is weak against. If you cannot decide between those two, there is the middle ground option of the Calamity Gate with its 7 might. It gives you a doubled weapon triangle advantage over the blue weapons, while remaining neutral against the red ones. It's got 5 more hit than the Bolt Axe, it gives a tiny +1 defense and speed, and unlike the Bolt Axe, it doesn't drop your avoid by 20. It lacks the Bolt Axe's sheer power, but will often make up for it with small advantages against varied enemy types. The one thing you won't get with these weapons is good accuracy, as they have rather low hit rates, so you might want to pack a Rat Spirit. I would recommend forging a +1 or even a +2. Hayato in particular has some consistency issues, but like I said before, he is tanky enough to where failing a hit every now and then doesn't usually get him in trouble. To make up for the occasional miss, Hayato retains his magical prowess from when he was a diviner. He has the Magic +2 skill and at least D rank tomes, while Rinkah has to build up from E. From my experience, Rinkah and Hayato will usually kill weaker enemy types in one round if they choose the right weapon or scroll for the situation. But even if they cannot, they almost always win in 2 rounds thanks to Seal Resistance. Seal Resistance is a weird skill that does absolutely nothing for them at lower levels when they're just using physical clubs. But after a promotion, it lowers the threshold for a kill over 2 turns by so much. The enemy gets -6 resistance after the first round of combat, meaning you will get +12 damage on an enemy you double when you fight them again. They can also get Seal Defense from the Spearfighter class, best obtained by befriending or marrying Oboro. Most of the time, I found myself just using magical weapons and everything after promotion, so this isn't too helpful for their own performance. But if you're using these two to set up kills for other units, it can be good for that reason. At this point in the game, you also gain access to more and more ways to stat stack, to make up for any deficiencies your units have. We've had tonics, pair-ups and cooking for most of the game, but these bonuses become bigger and more customizable as we make progress. A great class to pair up for both Onis is Onmyoji, basically Birthright's version of a Sage. At base, these give you both +4 in magic and speed, with more points available depending on which character you're using and what their support level is. For example, Orochi gives additional magic skill and resistance, while Sakura gives extra magic speed and luck. Alternatively, if you have a level 5 Onmyoji, they can use Rally Magic for +4, and this can help push these two over 2-hit kill thresholds that are usually hard to hit. It helps that, at this point in the game, you get more reclassing seals from the tier 2 shop, so you can afford to reclass units just to get more skills. For example, you can use a Heart Seal to put Jacob or Felicia into Strategist, and get Rally Resistance to make up for their lackluster magical bulk. This is also an opportunity to expand the skill kits of the Onis themselves. With a partner seal to spare, Rinkah could take further advantage of an Orochi friendship to dip into Diviner for a single level to get magic +2. Hayato has had access to the skill from the beginning, and this allows Rinkah to decrease his lead in raw magic a little bit. Hayato, on the other hand, can befriend Azama to gain access to the Great Master class. Admittedly, this option is somewhat investment heavy. Since we only have one early game Heart Seal, you cannot have both Azama and Hayato reclass to a physical class, so most likely, Hayato will just get Azama's Monk para bonuses, which are okay but not brilliant. And the Great Master class itself isn't great either, since Hayato will be stuck at E rank lances, forced to rely on a Brass Naginata. But the reward is getting Renewal at level 5. Renewal is an excellent skill for a tank like Hayato. For no cost whatsoever, he will restore 30% of his HP at the start of every turn. As durable as Hayato is, he does need the occasional healing to stay healthy, and it's not always practical to glue a healer to him. In other games, when you have a durable unit running alone, you can give him the occasional assist through Physic, but in Birthright all you have access to is the Wayne Festal, which sucks. Hayato could just bring his own healing items, but those are somewhat costly if he's using them all the time, not to mention he would have to give up a player phase action to use them. Renewal gives him a lot of value in the long term. After doing a run with and a run without getting it, the difference was so massive that I think I will always struggle through the 3 levels of Great Master just to obtain it. This is a lot easier if you have arm scrolls lying around. Once Hayato goes from E to D in lances, you can use an arm scroll to hit C and gain the ability to use the Bolt Naginata. That fixes the damage issue he has and makes him almost as strong as he is in Oni Savage. Those 20 rounds of combat with E lances still suck, but after that it will be smooth sailing. Whatever wild plans you have for support building and skill farming, you should strive to finish them around the end of chapter 20, because at that point, Birthright difficulty ramps up significantly. I haven't really gone into the various modes of Birthright yet, but everything I have said so far is under the assumption that we're playing on Lunatic, though the recommendations mostly still apply to lower difficulties. But around the time you get to Burning Falls, Birthright's maps become a lot more hostile, to the point where units that cannot hold their own in combat will often find themselves unable to contribute, and perhaps are even better off undeployed. Even units that were doing just fine before can now find themselves in trouble. Especially during chapter 23, where you fight Camilla in the sewers. The benchmarks to survive and kill the massive number of enemies now just seems to skyrocket out of reach for a lot of characters. Every enemy you fight is now promoted, and there are just so many of them, and they represent every side of the weapon triangle with high tier weaponry. It is at this point that during my first playthrough, I found myself getting annoyed and bored, and I ended up soloing the game with Ryoma from here on out. Part of what made me get some appreciation for Birthright is finally having built units that could hold their own here. Rinkah and Hayato have the bulk to survive and the 1-2 range to counterattack. Depending on the enemy type and the weapon they equip, they sometimes 1-round, but they can also fall back on a 2-rounding strategy with seal resistance. Their ability to double at 1-2 range also builds up their guard gauge really fast, which is crucial for survival as it lets them block enemy attacks roughly once every 2 combats. This can allow them to survive even waves with highly damaging enemies, such as sorcerers. It is at this point that I saw the biggest difference between these two in Hayato's favor. Renewal made him much more sustainable over multiple turns than Rinkah, and the slight stat leads he had over her felt much more significant than her lead in, for example, accuracy. However, I felt like neither of them was doing great. Their physical bulk is excellent, but Birthright loves mixing in magical enemies that do a little too much damage, and especially Rinkah can really get into trouble there. Enemy phase Juggernauts that 1-round KO can usually afford to take on 1 or 2 bad matchups every once in a while because the guard gauge will bail them out. But when you need 2 phases to beat down these magical enemies, that means they will likely get 2 chances to attack you. And Rinkah's HP deficit is exaggerated by her need to always be below max health to activate her personal. It would be so nice if one of these Oni chieftains had the magic to just 2-shot everything, as well as an actual resistance stat. Hey everyone, welcome to WAIFU, where what acronym to invent for this unit. Today, we're going to take a look at one of the best late game sweepers in Birthright, Rajat. I've only had Rajat for 1 playthrough and a half, and if anything happened to her, I would kill everyone on this route map, and then my Corrin. Rajat starts as a diviner, but she inherits her father's access to the Oni tree, and can thus reclass into it immediately. It's hard to give a precise forecast of what Rajat's stats look like exactly, since they change depending on her parents and their stats, as well as during which chapter you play her paralogue. For my playthroughs, I paired Hayato with Oboro and chose to recruit Rajat late into the game. One benefit of recruiting a child unit like Rajat later is not needing to level her up, and as a bonus, the enemies in her paralogue would grant more EXP to her and my other units. However, this does mean that she joins later in the main campaign. As an Oni chieftain, Rajat has excellent magic, even higher than Hayato's, comfortably reaching almost all 2-hit kill thresholds with no help needed. Her speed is similar to Hayato's and Rinkah's, allowing her to double comfortably. Her defense is a little bit worse than theirs, but she is still bulky enough to withstand multiple hits once trained up. But where she really excels is her resistance, having about twice as much as the other two. The resistance gap is way larger than the defense gap. A trained Rajat straight up takes 0 damage from sorcerers and dark knights. This large discrepancy means Rajat is overall much better at handling mixed groups of enemies. Now how come Rajat is allowed to have all these advantages? Well, she used one stat as her dump stat, her skill. She has like none of it. Rajat has some really embarrassing hit rates, sometimes even when she has triangle advantage. Hayato misses every now and then, but Rajat is just straight up unreliable. That's usually okay because, just like with the other two, she is so tanky that she can afford to take an extra turn to clean up enemies that she's missed. But if you desperately need her to wipe out an enemy on player phase because they're in your camp, chances are she will fail you. For those cases, it is recommended to forge up a Rat Spirit. Rat Spirit +1 is slightly stronger than Horse Spirit while having 15 more hit, and a Rat Spirit +2 is equally as powerful as the Calamity Gate while retaining that accuracy advantage. Whenever you do not need the bulk or weapon triangle that your usual scrolls provide you, the Rat Spirit tends to be the best option. In addition to her overall superior stats, Rajat of course has all the options child characters have through inheritance. Most significant, in my opinion, is her ability to inherit skills, such as the aforementioned Renewal, to give her the ability to sustain herself without support as she rampages through a route map. There are too many skills to name that could be good here. When I first wrote this section, I wanted to recommend some breaker skills to stop her from missing so much. Then I showed the script to Septi and she pointed out, yeah, breaker skills seem good, but they're an absolute pain to set up for inheritance because they're all obtained at level 15 promoted. Due to how long it takes for this game to send high-leveled enemies at you, by the time you can even obtain those skills on Rajat's parents, the game will be almost over. Not only does that cut into the time that you get to use Rajat for, but it also makes her gain more auto levels in her base class on Myoji instead of the GOAT class this whole video is about. It's going to cost her some serious points in defense, and she can't afford that if she wants to tank entire sewer systems, because that is something we want her to do. Oni Chieftain Rajat is great for most of the reasons Hayato and Rinkah are, and then some more. She has the bulk to survive, the range to counterattack, and the power to 2-hit KO. If she fights a group of 6 enemies, she will usually kill at least 4, and only fail the last 2 because of some unlucky misses. If you're having her just rampage through entire maps by herself, that barely matters. And if she's part of a team of units, then it's trivial to give her the support needed to either ensure that those misses don't happen, or that they don't impede your strategy too much if they do. And given that Hayato and especially Rinkah are likely to miss one-round KOs for their own reasons, it barely hurts her in comparison. Rajat has quickly become one of my favorite child units. In my first playthroughs, late game Birthright was a miserable experience because my unit builds weren't good, so the only solutions were to either slog through with my bad units or sweep through with Ryoma, which is boring. But sweeping with Rajat felt different, probably because it was so unexpected to me that she'd be this good, and because I had more agency in building her as a unit. I didn't just train her, I also trained her dad. Ryoma Sweep and Birthright are basically synonymous in online discourse about Birthright, but Rajat, I almost never hear anyone talk about her. She's got such good unit feel. Now, before we wrap up, I want to float another theory by you. So far, we have looked at Hayato, Rinkah, and Rajat, and we concluded they're all pretty good. Is it possible that what's so good about these units is not their own set of properties, but simply the fact that they can go into Oni Savage? Isn't anyone who has access to a bulky 1-2 range class going to be good? Let's test that thesis. Welcome to WAIFUs, where we actually investigate Farmdom Oni Savage. There are a couple of other units who have an easy path to Oni, but few of them come close to the strong performance that these 3 put up. For one, because you need the magic to do significant damage, but also enough speed to double, and then also enough bulk to take hits. You can patch up 1 or 2 stats through Fates' many means of stat stacking, but you can't repair all of them at once. And sometimes the hole is just too deep. For example, I've complained about Rinkah missing benchmarks, and her personal magic is not bad, it's just kind of average. If you want to talk about bad magic, let's look at Hinata. He has Oni as his Heart Seal class, but bro literally has 0 personal magic. If you raised him to 21, he would have 5 magic to work with, and that's going to be it until he procs his 15% growth. Oboro, who can get Oni through Rinkah's friendship, doesn't have much more. Good magic in Fates is just kind of rare, and a lot of units that have it tend to be so lacking in other stats that they still end up not performing that well. The undiscussed unit that wants Oni Chieftain the most is probably Orochi. Orochi has magic to spare, just like Rajat, but she also has a really good skill stat, so accuracy is not a problem for her. Instead, her bad stats are speed and bulk. That is a difficult combination of stats to fix through pair up, since few classes can increase both of those. Master of Arms exists, but it only gives 2 speed and defense. Then there's Hero, which is a Norian class, so very few units have access to it. Only Corrin, Silas, Shura, and Felicia. And if those units are going to Hero, you're likely better off having them take care of combat themselves rather than pairing into Orochi. And while Orochi is slow, you can make her double consistently, and while she is frail, you can give her the bulk to survive about as many enemies as Hayato, but it would be really difficult to do both at the same time. That's not to say that Oni Orochi is impossible to fix, it just takes a bit more effort than the Onis we have discussed today, and indeed most units in the game. Of course, I can't discuss a class without talking about how good Corrin would be in it, since Corrin has access to every class. And of course, Corrin would be more than fine. In fact, Corrin's relevant stats as an Oni Chieftain are very similar to Hayato's. At 21, they have almost the same HP, magic, speed and resistance, with Hayato having just a tad more defense, but Corrin can still pick a boon and a bane to optimize their stats a little bit more. And of course, Corrin is in a much better spot than Hayato with regards to their bases, access to supports and other classes, but I think it says a lot about Hayato that he roughly ties one of the best units in the game when they just copy each other's homework. That said, Corrin can do better than Oni Chieftain. Oni's biggest drawback is that it has no sword access, and that means not being able to use the Yato. Hayato is one of the very few good swords in Birthright's very late game, with its insane might and ability to pierce the final boss's dragon skin better than anything else. Missing out on that is a very big nerf to one of your best units late game combat. Corrin also has an actual sword rank to use other swords with, whereas he's not going to be able to get a whole lot out of E rank axes. On the skills front, Dark Knight offers Heartseeker, Malefic Aura, and Life Taker, all three of which are insanely good. I'm not saying that the Oni Chieftain's other skills are always bad, but this video is about trying to make that class look good, and there's a reason they've only come up this far in the video and will not be brought up again. For those reasons, if you'd like Corrin in a magic using class, Dark Knight is preferred. The raw stats are a little worse than Oni Chieftain, but Dark Knight gives Corrin both swords and higher mobility, while retaining good bulk and the ability to use magic. So even though Oni Savage and especially Oni Chieftain are good classes, there aren't that many units that make for great fits. I'm sure there are a couple more examples of units that could be made to fit in it through Corrin marriage, but the best ones really are the three we've discussed in detail: Rinkah, Hayato, and Rajat. These three combined had me obsessed with Birthright and unit builds for a while. Birthright used to get basically zero discussion in the Fire Emblem fandom, and I get why, because let's be real for a moment, the map designs aren't very interesting. But the unit and class design goes hard, and has actually been a lot of fun to analyze and discuss. With that in mind, I would like to thank a couple people for sparring with me on these three wonderful interesting waifus, and Birthright in general. First of all, Bad at Life, aka Bulk. Practically his entire channel is dedicated to Fates discussion, focused on Birthright, with a lot of super interesting and in-depth videos about each and every one of them. There are several you should watch about Hayato and Rinkah that discuss some aspects of them that I didn't get to, and there's also some commentated gameplay action for each of them. Occasionally on the mic with Bulk is Septi, one of the absolute goats for Fire Emblem Fates analysis, and actually not just Fates, but for the harder and deeper games in the series in general. Septi is a champion at simplifying complex analysis and evaluating just how good a unit or a certain aspect really is, and I had a lot of fun sparring with her about the Onis to check if my thoughts on them were the norm or not, as well as getting a ton of extra analysis from her as well as other options for Oni Savage. I also had a lot of helpful discussions about these units with Modi and Xandurrr, so thanks to you two as well. And while I'm thanking Patrons, I might as well thank all of them because all of you give me so much financial freedom to take forever on creating these big videos. If you're pledged to my Patreon, that means you're awesome and I appreciate your help a lot. If you join my Patreon, then your name could be here and you could join my Patreon only chat on Discord, play games with us on Sunday nights, and occasionally have a peek at what I'm working on. Especially big thanks, as always, to Thick Mulder, Scott Mitchell, Skmitty, Schmeep, Safi Senchu, Frankie Stein, D, Cold Cookie, Boots42, Blue Caterade, Bendion, Arkhold, and Modi for bribing their way to the top of my Patreon tier list. And of course, thanks to Athena for turning a loose collection of sound and video files into a wonderfully edited video, and Rising Sunfish for the amazing thumbnail. And last but not least, thanks to you for watching.